Happy Friday, everyone. Today we are kicking off a new series, Hot Summer Nights, where we are going to be addressing the command conflicts within the Army of the Potomac and the Army of the James as they were entrenched outside the cities of Richmond and Petersburg in the summer of 1864. And it was there that it was their hope to destroy or capture the Army of Northern Virginia led by their famous general, Robert E. Lee. But Union soldiers in the summer of 1864 are not going to witness a series of battles in their front take place. Rather, they are going to witness their superior officers battle each other over position and plans. But ultimately, these command conflicts will create the army it possesses in 1865 that successfully defeats and captures the Army of Northern Virginia. And today, we are going to be talking about the two primary leaders of the Army of the Potomac based upon how you interpret it. And that's going to be Ulysses S. Grant and George Gordon Meade. In the spring of 1864, two of the Union's most capable generals found themselves bound together by war, responsibility, and uneasy trust. One was Ulysses S. Grant, the quiet, unshakable man from the West whose victories at Vicksburg and Chattanooga had made him the Union's indispensable soldier. And it was that spring he was appointed by President Lincoln as general-in-chief. And it was the president who appreciated Grant's ability to see the war as a whole rather than isolated battles. The other was George Gordon Meade, the professional, high-strung, and proud commander of the Army of the Potomac, who only the year before had stopped Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg. And by March of 1864, these two men were about to share a single battlefield and a single burden. The partnership between Grant and Meade would be vital to Union victory, but it would also be fraught with tension, pride, and misunderstanding. Their relationship that summer, often expressed in short business-like telegrams and messages, tells us a great deal about leadership under pressure and about how victory can depend on personalities as much as plans. And when they first met in the spring of 1864, there was mutual respect. Grant recognized Meade's experience and competence. Meade acknowledged Grant's strategic brilliance. Yet from the outset, there was tension. Grant commanded with a sense of urgency and expectation for bold, decisive action. Meade, grounded in the realities of the Army's capabilities and the defensive strength of the enemy, favored caution. Over the following weeks, their relationship would be defined not only by battles, but by telegraphs, rapid-fire communication that carried orders, reports, and sometimes subtle critiques across the lines between City Point and Petersburg. These messages, seemingly formal and technical, reveal the strains and pressures of command during the Virginia campaign. Grant and Meade could have hardly been more different. Grant came east in 1864 with a reputation for his calm and relentless determination. He was modest, famously unassuming, and yet unmistakably confident in his ability to win. After years of failure before the war, resigning from the Army, struggling in civilian life, Grant's military genius emerged in the West. He won not by maneuver alone, but by resolve. Grant didn't talk much, but when he did, it was clear and it was simple. He believed wars were won by what Harry LeVar characterizes as analytical determination. Grant pressed the enemy until their will broke. He disliked politics, distrusted self-promotion, and preferred action to words. By 1864, his victories at Vicksburg and Chattanooga had impressed President Lincoln so much that Congress revived the rank of lieutenant general, last held by George Washington, and gave it to Grant. From that moment on, he was in command of all Union armies. George Meade's path was much more traditional. A career officer trained at West Point, Meade had served in the Mexican-American War and worked for years as an engineer. He was a disciplined soldier, often sharp-tongued and deeply aware of the hierarchy and reputation. His sudden promotion to command of the Army of the Potomac in June of 1863 came just days before Gettysburg, where he fought and won the largest battle of the war. But that victory brought him little peace. Washington politicians questioned his caution, and some in the army whispered that he should have destroyed the Confederate general, Robert E. Lee. Meade was proud, sensitive to criticism, and quick to anger when he felt slighted. When Grant arrived in March 1864, Meade offered to resign, not out of resentment, but to give Grant a free hand to pick his own commander. Grant refused. He told Meade he had no intention of replacing him, and that he trusted him to command the Army of the Potomac, while Grant oversaw all Union forces. Still, from that moment, everyone understood the truth. Meade would be the commander of the Army of the Potomac, but Grant would be the man directing the campaign. In early May 1864, Grant and Meade led the Army of the Potomac across the Rapidan River and into the tangled wilderness of Virginia. The plan was simple in principle, if brutal in practice. Grant would engage Lee directly wherever he stood and keep moving toward Richmond no matter the cost. The two men worked together, but their temperaments often clashed. Grant operated with a kind of detached calm. Meade operated with intensity and sometimes impatience. The stress of the overland route into Virginia, with the endless battles, the wilderness, Spotsylvania, Northalia, and Cold Harbor, only magnified their differences. Grant often communicated with Meade through written messages, brief, professional, sometimes cold. Meade responded in kind, though his private letters show growing frustration. He felt he was being judged unfairly, overshadowed by Grant's celebrity, and second-guessed by men who didn't understand the complexity of his job. Meade was right to feel suspicious. In the brutal battle of the engagement of June 3rd at Cold Harbor, Grant directed Meade to personally oversee the attack. He was to coordinate each of the assaults made by the 2nd, 6th, 18th, 5th, and 9th Corps. Meade's attempt was futile. The Confederate Army fortified their position the day before. None of the Union Corps attacked simultaneously. Only Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps briefly penetrated the Confederate works until they were driven back. Frustrated by the lack of success on the Union left, he ordered Gouverneur Warren and his 5th Corps to make an attack a mile to the north in an attempt to envelop the enemy despite Warren's concerns. He gave Warren the order to not worry about coordinating with other corps commanders and simply attack. Luckily, Grant involved himself. He saw the disappointing reports from his headquarters. He rode out from headquarters talking with his corps commanders. And it was after this discussion that he personally suspended all the assaults. The Union lost heavily, with roughly 6,000 casualties that entire day, with the Confederates only sustaining around 2,000. Grant looked south across the James River and saw an opportunity to strike Lee's supply lines at Petersburg. Both generals readied the army and disengaged from the bloody fields of Cold Harbor. They stole a march on Lee, making their way to Petersburg. Despite their advantage in numbers and surprise, they failed to capture the city, leaving many to speculate who was to blame. As the summer wore on and the army settled into the siege of Petersburg, the relationship between the two men entered a new phase. The heat, the casualties, and the endless entrenchments took their toll. Meade's temper, never easy, became shorter. He sometimes exploded at subordinates or quarreled with Grant's staff officers, especially John Rawlins, who tended to speak for Grant more bluntly than Meade liked. Grant, for his part, tolerated Meade's moods. He recognized Meade's competence and loyalty. He even recommended him for a promotion during the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. But he also kept Meade at arm's length. Grant's reports went directly to Washington, and the press often treated him, not Meade, as the true commander of the army. For Meade, this was humiliating. He believed Grant should have made clear that the Army of the Potomac was still his. But Grant rarely discussed such things. His silence could be as frustrating as his orders. We can see the tension in their written messages, which became increasingly curt as the siege dragged on. In these days, Grant acknowledged the limitations of the Army's current position and the impracticability of a direct assault. He wrote, "At present, we are doing very well. All the roads are cut, and the enemy are living now on half rations. The best we can do now is to strengthen our present line on Burnside's and Warren's front and advance by gradual approaches as you propose." Meade, ever methodical, updated him in detail. "Everything was quiet along my lines. Major General Burnside reports the enemy is having established a mortar battery in his front. An examination of the proposed point of attack in front of Burnside's line, made by the chief engineer of the army, has resulted in less favorable report than anticipated. After careful questioning of deserters and examination of Richmond papers, I conclude active operations against the enemy in this present position are most advisable, as it leaves our communications open and intact." Even seemingly minor matters such as verifying soldiers' passes were handled through telegraphs, reflecting the immense administrative load placed on both men and the constant need for communication. These exchanges over a few days in early July of 1864 illuminate the core of their tenuous relationship. Grant's drive for strategic boldness versus Meade's commitment to operational prudence. Each respected the other's abilities, but their temperaments and perspectives created friction. The war was never confined to a single front. While Petersburg remained the main theater, Grant received reports of Confederate activity threatening Maryland and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. On July 5th, he sent urgent instructions. "The enemy have got to the B&O Road and have destroyed the railroad bridge from Patterson's Creek to Harper's Ferry. Send in one good division of your troops and all the dismounted cavalry to be forwarded at once. I will not send an army corps until more is learned." Meade responded promptly with intelligence from deserters and scouts, providing context and confirming the movements of Confederate forces under Early. He also relayed detailed reports from his line at Petersburg, including casualties, progress on siege works, and enemy activity. Saying later, "After examination and conference with corps commanders, I am satisfied an immediate assault on the enemy's line in my front is impractical. The only plan to dislodge the enemy from this line is by regular approach." Meanwhile, Grant continued to issue guidance on multiple fronts, including monitoring troop movements in North Carolina and naval victories such as the sinking of the CSS Alabama, demonstrating the sheer scope of his command. Despite the intensity, both men were working toward the same objective: the reduction of Confederate defenses around Petersburg and the weakening of Lee's army. But the correspondent shows the push and pull dynamic. Grant's impatience for bold action, tempered by Meade's insistence on careful preparation, all while managing a constantly shifting operational environment. However, there came a boiling point. On July 8th, Grant wrote to Meade that he would send Colonel Cyrus Comstock to explain his latest plan. Grant still hoped to break through on Benjamin Butler's front north of the Appomattox, but wanted Meade's army to begin regular approaches toward the Confederate lines at Petersburg. The move would, Grant explained, not only advance preparations for a possible assault, but also distract the enemy from the coming operation along Swift Creek. That same day, Their telegraph lines hummed with steady rhythm of wartime administration. Meade reporting artillery fire, requests about sutlers, and logistical minutiae. Grant replying with clipped authorizations. And beneath these exchanges, however, ran a growing tension. Grant had grown irritated by Meade's cautious temperament and his constant appeals for guidance. He, however, was the commander of the Army of the Potomac. Grant was general-in-chief. Grant's chief of staff, John A. Rawlins, shared these frustrations and hinted that Meade's communication style worried the general more than he cared to admit. Privately, Grant considered relieving Meade altogether. He confided to his staff that he had thought seriously of having him removed. He believed Meade's overcaution and querulous tone hampered the Army's aggressiveness before Petersburg. In the end, he decided against it, not out of satisfaction, but because he recognized the turmoil such a change would cause at a critical juncture in the campaign. But by the end of 1864, both men endured nearly a year of unrelenting warfare together. They had argued, misunderstood one another, and endured staggering losses, but neither broke. Meade's professionalism held the Army together when morale was low, and Grant's determination kept the pressure on Lee when others might have paused. In the end, their partnership was effective, precisely because of these differences. Grant's vision ensured the Union Army remained relentless, pressing Lee on multiple fronts, while Meade's prudence prevented disaster on the battlefield. Through telegraphs, reports, and careful coordination, they navigated these complexities of war, proving that even a tense relationship could yield remarkable results. Later, Grant would tell others that Meade had exceeded his expectations. Meade, though often bitter about his treatment, continued to serve loyally until his death in 1872. Their story is not one of friendship, but of endurance. Two professionals bound by the same terrible duty, forced to trust each other even when trust was hard to come by. In that sense, their uneasy partnership was a microcosm of the war itself, full of friction, error, pride, and perseverance, yet ultimately aimed toward a single purpose: to end the rebellion and preserve the Union. So when the war ended at Appomattox in April 1865, it was Meade that still retained his command. Even though he wasn't there to witness Lee's surrender, he nevertheless stood by Grant every step of the way. The two men, so different in temperament, had together carried the Army of the Potomac to final victory. Thanks again for listening, everyone. If you like today's episode, please make sure to subscribe and feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the resources or possible books that you would like for me to post or recommend. And then, of course, if you have any opinions about this as well, I'd love to hear it. All right. Have a great weekend.